Is Jimmy Carter back? Asked Larry Kudlow. Now, I'm a big fan of Larry Kudlow. I've been a big fan of him for a long time. He has written in the National Review back when I used to read the National Review. He had his own show on Fox or a Fox Business. I think it was Fox many years ago. He was part of the Trump administration. Just a big fan of Larry Kudlow. Remember, he used to do like Kudlow and something. Anyway, I think it was on CNBC, as a matter of fact. So he writes this in the New York Sun. Is Jimmy Carter back or what? A flash of inflation signals a warning, but lots of good stuff in this, my friends. So let's read this from Larry. There's a big inflation report today, another 0.6% in May. That's an 8.4% at an annual rate over the past 3 months. The Federal Reserve target used to be 2%, which is what we've had for over 20 years. It sounds really ominous. Ooh, scary. Wait a minute. Though conservatives might hate me for this, President Carter really, truthfully, factually did not launch double-digit inflation. He was merely captured by it, and his presidency was destroyed because of it. Hold on a second. I think he ever really understood it. It wasn't just about oil prices. He did, though, appoint Paul Volcker to run the Fed. Isn't that interesting? Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker. Volcker was my former boss at the New York Fed. I was his executive assistant. It was Paul Volcker under Reagan, and remember, Volcker was a Democrat, who slew inflation. Reagan gave Volcker the ground to stand on. The truth, though, factually and analytically, is that it was the president who unleashed inflation was Richard Nixon. That's right. It is unfortunately the 37th president who closed the gold window where the dollar was exchangeable for gold at a 35th of an ounce. That went back so the dollar was, so you could turn a dollar in and get a 35th of an ounce of gold. That's what you could do. But he closed that window. That went back to the post-war deal reached at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. It restored to the world economy the gold exchange standard with the dollar at the center of that system. Nixon was worried about trade deficits and a deteriorating balance of payments. Let me show you what happens here. Deficits are irrelevant. I'll do another video here in a few minutes on Frederick Bastiat. Trade deficits are irrelevant. Balance of payments are irrelevant. And so what Nixon says, oh my goodness, we're importing more goods than we're exporting. You know why? Because the Japanese have a lower dollar. Whatever they use was the Japanese, not the won. You know the Japanese, the freaking yen, right? Yeah. So I don't know what they're using back then. I don't know if it's the yen or not. I don't know. But what all these, South Korea, what all they did was they became mercantilists, whereas they said we're going to export our way to growth. China does the same thing. So they devalue their currency. That's what they do, because when you have a devalued currency, exports become cheaper in the place you're trying to target. So it becomes cheaper for us to buy Japanese, Korean, now Chinese, Vietnam, Indian goods than it does to create our own. And so what we do is we send money to these. They send us their goods and we send them money. And they use our money to do what? To buy our bonds. Shocking, huh? And so the idea that the Chinese just going to rip apart our, as if they own that much of our bonds anyway, or the Japanese, they just don't. But they're going to say, we're not going to buy any more of your bonds. Okay, we'll see how that goes, man, because the reason you have the money to buy our bonds is why? Because we buy your goods. And so Nixon said, oh my goodness, the trade deficits, we better devalue our own money so we can compete. And that's what they did. They closed the gold window, and lo and behold, double-digit inflation. Let's see. Instead, Nixon closed the gold window, meaning foreign governments could no longer exchange dollars for gold. The value of the greenback fell like a stone. So you think about that. They could no longer exchange dollars for gold. So what they end up doing? They end up buying our debt. So the value of our currency declined. Prices denominated in dollars skyrocketed. We printed bad money and too much of it. And that's the definition of inflation. Excess money in relation to demand will do it every time. Larry's creating a different take on the old monetarist phenomenon about inflation. Excess money in relation to demand. See, the demand is always the key. Balance sheet recessions. Demand goes out the window regardless of what your interest rates are. Lack of a value will do it every time. In 1973, Nixon abolished all remaining remnants of the gold-dollar exchange system, and inflation soared, first hitting double digits while Nixon was president. All commodity prices, including oil, skyrocketed along with just about everything else. On top of that, income taxes were not indexed to inflation. That's called the tax bracket creep. So where did we learn all this stuff about not indexing things? Oh yeah, Social Security taxation, IRMA taxation, what used to be the AMT, alternative minimum tax. So higher and higher inflation drove middle-class Americans into higher and higher tax brackets. In other words, stagflation. Intermittently, from then until Reagan, inflation would pop up to double digits. Interest rates peaked about 15% in government bonds. Reagan came in and squelched it all. As a hard money gold advocate and friend of Milton Friedman, Reagan, who is also my former boss, gave Volcker carte blanche to restore dollar value and vanquish inflation. Then Reagan slashed tax rates from 20 to 28 from 70. Remember, he did this with the Democrats in Congress, by the way. Providing fresh after-tax incentives to rejuvenate the economy and give folks back their real income lost during the Nixon-Carter years. Interesting, Nixon-Carter. So we had Bush-Obama. Now we got Biden. So basically, two things of the same coin, two sides of the same coin. We had Nixon and Carter, two sides of the same coin, man. That's just all there is to it. You can even say we had Reagan and Clinton, well, Bush, George W. Bush, but Reagan, Clinton, kind of two sides of the same coin too. It's weird how the same mode follows actually. One last point on inflation is everywhere and always a monetary thing, a phenomenon, as Milton Friedman taught us. The optimal policy mix was stable money and low tax rates. Well, this is I always find this interesting because that's what the monetarists will say. I just love how he also gives credence to Nobel laureate Robert Mundell and Art Laffer. Friedman, I think he's got Nobel Prize. I don't know. But I don't, who cares? Nobel laureate. Oh, the Nobel Committee. Oh, who cares? It's everywhere and always it's everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. Okay, but yet we had none. And yet we're spending like drunken sailors on a Reagan. We were at the beginning of Clinton. We were under certain Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and yet the inflation that we have is just all of a sudden out of nowhere, just showing up. I mean, come on, man. Everywhere and always a monetary problem, but yet we didn't have any for the longest time. But yet we're still spending like drunken sailors. Why? I coined the phrase king dollar years ago and it stuck, but I was just referring to stable money, sound money, and of course the Laffer curve has prevailed during the JFK and Reagan decades, and most recently under President Trump. Against that backdrop, this is not the 1970s. Despite the recent jump in inflation, the dollar has held its ground reasonably well. Let's see. Gold hasn't moved much. Today it's up about $1, but gold was below 1,700 at the end of March, and now it's closing in on 1,900. That's not a great signal, which leads me to conclude with 2 points. First, if Uncle Joe gets his green workers' paradise, Soviet-style Bulgarian economic policies of tax increases, social spending destroy the fossil fuel sector, then the dollar will collapse and leaping tax rates will choke off any economic growth. 100% agree with that. Call it the 1970s with a socialist spin. In that case, we would have permanently higher inflation and a weaker economy. But why would we have higher inflation? Because we have less goods being produced. Scarcity, man. Scarcity, as I always say, is a driver of that. Because Soviet-style Bulgarian economies cannot produce the goods that people want. And they can't. If Mr. Biden's green workers' paradise does not get voted in, then I would say that this inflation bump is temporary. It's just a rebound from the pandemic deflation. That's what I'm saying. It's actually a sign of strong economic growth and there'll be no long-term inflation consequences. Right now, we're still operating under Trump's rules, tax cuts, minimal regulation, and energy independence. Hence, the vaccinated V-shaped recovery. Why is my side so like vaccines? It's like the weirdest thing. We want to believe in science. It's the weirdest thing, man. More people working is a good thing. Prosperity should be a great American goal. So we will see about this inflationary story. I don't think it's there yet, but it sure is a threat. Yeah, I agree with that. Good article. I like my man Larry. I put a link in the show notes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. At the end of the day, Biden isn't getting the Green New Deal put in there. He's not. He'll do some regulatory crap that we've been having to deal with for years and years and years. Reagan should have got rid of the DOE, the Department of Education, as he campaigned on, could never get it done. Trump tried to do some back of the envelope deregulation, which was freaking fantastic. Biden, just like that, reading it and ignites it though, and we're getting rid of. We closed the pipeline, Keystone Pipeline. It's not like oil won't be delivered. It can be delivered by trucks and trains. It's still going to find its way, man. And then we still got can't drill in Anwar. There will be no offshore oil drilling, but they're going to have offshore wind turbines, which is, wait a second, so one's evil and one's not. All right, we'll see you.